All right, Pastor. So we're coming up on your 50th year preaching this year.
Yes.
And I wanted to just take this time to really have a conversation, just reflecting on your 50 years of preaching ministry. So let's start somewhat from the beginning. As far back as you can remember, what was life like for Jesse Horton Sr. as a child?
As a child, it was rather tough. I was real sick at all until I got about 6 years old. I was in and out of the hospital. It was really tough back in my day. Yeah, growing up, everything kind of fell on us as children. I was the second of 18 children. And I've always worked in the field, picking cotton, chopping cotton, taking care of the horses and the mules, all of that as a child. And then really, I didn't have much of a childhood because my father got sick when I was 15 years old, and he was down for 2 full years, unable to work. I had to drop out of school, and the gentleman hired me in my daddy's place on his job, paid me my daddy's pay, and I paid for the car. I took care of the whole family for 2 whole years, my whole family. I work all week, and sometime I'd have $5 left. All the rest of my money went to the taking care of the family. So I really missed a lot of things. And then after that, I'm 17 years old now, and I didn't want to go back to school because I was behind. And I got married because I felt like I was a man. So at 17, I was married and taking care of a family. Married 17. September of that same year, our first child was born, Annie Denise. And the Lord has really been good to us over the years. If I had to do over again, I would probably do a lot of things different. I would do a lot of things different, but through it all, God really blessed us. There are times when people say to me, "Oh, if I had your hand, Jesse, I'd throw mine in." That's well, you need to know where my hand's been. You can't look at me now and say, what it's like, because I really came up through the ranks where, I went winters at a time without shoes. I first got married, I had to sell my car because I couldn't take care of the car and my wife. So now I'm walking. It was tough, man. It was tough. It really was. And then I finally got able to buy a 57 Ford, pink and white. And I decided to tell a tale, and I wanted to be off that Saturday so I could, do whatever I wanted to do. So I sent my wife to the store to call the boss man, because we didn't have phones in our homes at that time, and call him and tell him I wasn't feeling good. I wasn't going to be able to come in. And on her way back home, she wrecked my car, totaled it out without driving license. I had insurance, but the insurance wouldn't cover because she didn't have license. And now I'm paying for a car sitting under the tree. And finally, I was able to work back up, and I bought a 58 Plumber. It must have come out of Chicago because it was just really rotting out at the bottom. And the fume would come up in the car, so we'd be riding in the car in wintertime with the windows rolled down to breathe. It was really tough, I'm going to tell you now. Wrap the babies up in quilts to try to keep them warm, because with all them holes in the car, it really wouldn't get warm in there. So again, when I look back at it, it was really tough. But the wife and I made it through it. There were those who said it because we got married at such a young age. I was 17, she was 15. Those children know what they're doing, but most of all of them that said it wind up divorced, and we're still together. 58 years later, we're still together. So the Lord blessed us through that.
So going back to your childhood a little bit, younger years, How was the religious climate of your home when you were a young child?
When I was a young child, it wasn't. My daddy wasn't in church. My mother wasn't in church. Matter of fact, my daddy's family was not in church. My mother's family, father, none of them was in church at all. But then my daddy committed his life to Christ. I was married at the time when my daddy committed his life to Christ. And then Daddy started really sharing with us. What really blessed me back in that day, Reverend Wooddale and his wife would go through communities teaching Bible classes. And I went to Bible class there at Spring Hill. And really, through those classes, I was saved around when I was 8 years old, and then baptized, and was really in church. My mom, dad wasn't in church, but the children was in church. Papa Lewis would pick us up on a yellow Ford truck, take us to Sunday school on Sunday morning church. But that's when I really got into church, was through Bible classes, and committed my life to Christ. And then when I got to be a teenager, I kind of strayed away from it. Got to hanging out with some boys who was into a lot of other things, and I really struggled to hold on to that in my life, but I find myself right back out there, saved but not committed. And then at the age of 21, I rededicated my life to the Lord. And for the last 54, 55 years, I've been totally committed, never went back again. It blessed my family.
So, a question about, you said your dad had a transforming experience. He came to salvation. So what actually happened with your dad? Do you remember exactly like what happened with his life and how he came to know the Lord? Was it overnight or how was it? What happened?
It was really a sudden thing with my daddy, because I guess Daddy had done some of everything that a man could do, and he was at this point in his life, he wanted to change. Like I said, was never brought up in church, but all of a sudden, my daddy goes to church, committed life to Christ, and take all those children to church with him. I mean, and he was a diehard Christian. I knew my daddy when he was drinking, when he was out all night, smoking. I mean, Daddy did it all. But when my daddy committed life to Christ, I never saw my daddy smoke a cigarette. I never heard my daddy use a curse word. I never saw Daddy doing anything sinful, and that's what really blessed me in my life. When I look back at my daddy, at all that he was doing, Daddy would say to me, he said, Jesse, whatever you're doing, and you really don't want to do it, if you would just tell Jesus, he would help you. And I could hear my daddy's voice that Thursday evening, 1969, as I was working in Union Fork and Oak Company. And Daddy, I could hear that voice, just tell Jesus. And I got off work at 3:30 that evening, got in my car, and got out on Lynch Street going downtown to pick my wife up from work. And on my way there, I'm talking to Jesus. I turned off of West Street to Pearl Street. And before I could drive a block, the Lord had just really gotten me in. I'm talking about just like penetrating all through my clothes. And that was an inward change in my life. And I had a pack of Marlboros in my pocket. And on my way home, I threw the Marlboros away. I littered that day. Committed my life to Christ. I got home. I had, talked about recommitting more than one time. And I didn't want to just tell the wife because she gonna say, oh, here he go again. But I said, honey, I've committed my life to Christ. He saved me. He saved me. She says to me, I think she may have said, well, I see. But from that day on, never smoked a cigarette, never did any cursing, never listened to worldly music. I did just like my daddy. Everything that I was doing that was in the world that was wrong. That Thursday evening, it ended. I mean, it ended. I saw my daddy My daddy even stopped drinking coffee. He said anything that his flesh craved for when he was in the world, he was going to give it up when he committed his life to Christ. And that's the way I was. All that I was done in the world, the music. I got home and I got all of my records, took them up on the hill on Wigan Road and threw them in the dumpster because I said it wasn't good for me. It wasn't good for anyone else. I mean, the Lord totally changed my life. And people ask me, how did cold turkey? I said, listen, if you give it over to Jesus, he'll take care of it. Yeah.
So you talked about how leading up to that moment, you were kind of running with your certain crew and the guys you were hanging with. So what was your backstory? Were you the good guy, the criminal? What was your background in terms of living during this backsliding stage or this time before you really committed your life to Christ? What type of things were you
I was
into?
a leader. Part of it didn't start till I got there. I'm serious. I was the leader. I did all the foolish things that a sinner could do. I really did, and guys just really looked up to me even when I was in the world because I would go the extra mile in anything I did. My own regular cars, I would drive them as fast as they would go. We would race from Raymond to Jackson. Whomever got the fudge would have to would get beer served to them. So I cut every corner there was to be the first one there. And I did a lot of foolish things. I said one night in Bible class, I was toting 2 pistols, a 38 nickel plate stuck in, 25 automatic under my handkerchief in my back pocket. I really wanted someone to bother me so I could shoot someone. But thank be to God, through all of that, the Lord kept me. He kept me, and I told him, after that, I give up the 38, the 25, and picked up a 66 special. Amen. That was the Bible. So I've been shooting ever since.
So, so you told that day where it all happened, that transformation. Was there anything like leading up to that day? Like, what was it while you were at work or just?
Oh man, I was having a lot of personal problems, a lot of things going on in my life, and I was really contemplating suicide. That's where I was in my life. I was going off that bridge on 20 that goes over 80 highway, and I was going off that bridge, and I really had made up my mind to do it. And on one day, I guess during that week, I know it was the Lord, though, got me to take note that if you run your car off the bridge and a truck hits you down there and you become incapacitated where you won't be able to do anything but move your eyes and be in a wheelchair the rest of your life, someone going to have to see after you, sucking your food through a straw. I decided then that I wasn't going to try that. And I was working at Union Falcon Oak Company, and that Thursday evening, I got to thinking again. Reverend R.D. Wells, my brother, we would work together. So both of us got to talking on the job that day, and both of us decided that we had gone as far as we were going. We were going to commit our life to Christ. And that Thursday, that's when it happened.
Wow. So you had this life-changing encounter with God, and ultimately you give your life to Christ, never looking back.
Never looking back.
So how long after that did you get the call to preach?
After committing to 69, when I committed my life to Christ, I'm teaching Sunday school. My assistant superintendent, they was getting ready to make me a deacon. And the Lord just really spoke. I didn't want to preach because my brother was already preaching, and things I heard them say about preachers, deacons talking about preachers. I said, Lord, no, this is not something I want to do. And I was working, and a guy working for Moses Electric Company said to me one day, Jesse, you're going to probably wind up preaching, because I really talked about the Lord in the Bible all the time. I said, no, that'll be something that I'll never do. And before that week was gone, the Lord really spoke to my heart about preaching. And I said it to the wife again. I said, the Lord calling me to preach. She said, well, he calling you. He not calling me. And I got in my car to go tell my pastor, Reverend Jesse Sutton Sr., that the Lord had called me to preach. And on my way there, when I got to Lynch Street, I was going out of Lynch Extension, and when I got to 80 Highway, my car just went off. I mean, just went off. I'm sitting there at the light, and I'm saying, this is a sign from the Lord. He not calling me to preach. And after I said that, a few minutes later, I hit the switch, my car crunk up, I turned around and went back home, because that was a sign. And then that Sunday morning when I got to church, I said to the pastor, I went to the study, I said, Pastor, the Lord is calling me to preach, and I just can't put it off any longer. He said to me, he said, Horton, I knew something was going on in your life long before now. Set up a date for me to preach, and I preached my first sermon December the 30th, 1973. That was my first sermon that I preached. I talked about, have you touched him? The woman that had the issue of blood. That was my first sermon. Never will forget it. It wasn't an experience, I promise you that. It was really tough on me coming up to that. But once I did it, looked like the Lord just really calmed me down and got me ready for it. At this time, like I said, I had dropped out of school, take up my dad's job and all. But at that time, then I started back working on my GET and went to Jackson State and passed my test. It took me now these kids go take GETs like nothing, but I was on the campus for 8 hours doing my work and passed my test. After that, I got in seminary. Matter of fact, I was in the seminary before I preached my first sermon. I had already started going to seminary, McKenzie Theological Seminary, and worked on that, and worked until I got my bachelor's degree. And after finishing that, then I started work on my master's degree and worked on that. And I was a little bit older now, after my mind just wasn't ready for anything else. So after that, I just kind of stopped for a while. And then about 15 years ago, I went back and worked on my doctor's degree. So that was a struggle because I'm working and I'm pastoring at the same time. Because after preaching in 73, in 77, I'm pastoring my first church. No, that was 76. I'm pastoring my first church, Lily Mae at Georgetown. 27 years old, my first church. So it was a real experience for me, and it was for the church as well. But the Lord saw me through there, and a few years later, I was called to my second church, Galilee, down in Rockport. So I'm at one church, first and third, the other church, second and fourth. So it was a journey for us.
So was there anything when you felt that initial call, were there any particular burdens like that caused you to want to preach the gospel, or was it just a clear sense that you...
It was a clear sense that the Lord was calling me to preach. But now this is what I say about being called to preach. Anyone who just want to preach, is something wrong with him. I'm serious. Anyone who say, well, I really want to preach, there's something wrong with them. Because most people see it as a job, position where people are going to look up to you and respect you, but that's not so. If you're not called into this, you're not going to really hold out. I promise you won't hold out because people can really be mean to you as a preacher. Now, for about 48 years ago when I first started pastoring, there was a certain amount of respect for the preacher. People would be into things bad, the preacher coming up, they would just, they would cut it off. Wouldn't curse around the preacher, you know. In the church, people really respect the Bible. Even if they didn't do it, they wouldn't fight you about the truth. But that's not so now. It's been a drastic change in church and the way people feel about preachers now. We just one of the gangs now. People don't have very few people who really have respect for the preacher. So I'll tell anyone, because I've had a number of men come to me. I got a number of sons in Emmanuel who is preaching, but each one of them that came to me, I spent some time trying to talk them out of preaching, because I knew if I could talk them out of preaching, the Lord hadn't called them into preaching. So it's not a glamorous job. It's really not what people think it is. They think you're going to get rich because you're preaching, but I'm going to tell you, you can get hungry just living off of preaching. When I first started pastoring, if I had not had a job, I wouldn't have been able to pastor, because the church wasn't paying me enough to really, for my gas and clothes being clean. See, people don't think about the clothes that the preacher got to get clean. I got suits and I've got a bundle of stuff I got to get clean. And people don't look at that, the wear and tear of your car. When they buying one and ride in it, I buy one in the next 2 or 3 years, I got to buy another car because I got the miles on it. So it's really a struggle. It ain't all that people's make it to be. But really, again, if I didn't love God and love people's, I would have went back to plumbing.
So what about now? Do you have any, so you said, in the beginning, there wasn't like a particular burden. It was just that clear sense of a call. But what about now? What would you say is your main motivations when it comes to preaching the gospel?
Souls. I want souls saved. That's one reason I don't come in Sunday morning showboating and just playing and just trying to reach people's emotions for a shout on Sunday morning. I want souls saved, man. I want people prepared for the kingdom of God, because he promised us he's coming back and he's going to start with the church. And I just believe the church ought to be ready for his return. And we can't get people ready for his return playing, shucking and jiving and compromising. I know some Sunday morning, we're probably just about every Sunday morning, I come in, like I'm looking in hell, you know what I'm saying? And I'm preaching because I just don't want people to go to hell. Now, that's my passion now for the rest of my life, for the rest of my pastoral preaching. That's what it's about with me. It used to be, with me, when I would go off to preach, it wasn't so much, I'm just going off to preach, so it's a time to, just have fun and worry about emotions, and but not now. Whenever I get an opportunity to preach now, it's about souls now. It's about souls. So I guess I go in now meddling from the beginning, trying to get souls right with God.
So I think in all aspects of life, we've had our share of challenges.
Yes.
So what would you say have been some personal challenges that you've dealt with in ministry over the last 50 years?
In ministry, challenges was really dealing with deacons. Now that's a challenge, and that's even a problem today. I thank God that I don't have that problem at Emmanuel, but back then, and I'm assuming, and they say it's dangerous to assume, but I'm assuming, because most of our church was one Sunday, and most of the preachers, pastors back in that day had 4 or 5 churches. Of course, some of them got 7 and 8 churches now, and they were just running ripping. They never pastored the people, so the deacons really became the role of pastor. So when a pastor would go in, all they wanted him to do is come in and preach and get his little money and get out of there. That was all they wanted. So mine was, when I was called to pastor, I was determined to pastor the church. So many of the preachers would say, will it take from 5 to 7 years to pastor a church? But I said, that's not so. I pastored each church from day number one. It may have took some of those members 5 to 7 years to accept me as the pastor, but I went in pastoring. I didn't go in cutting no corners. I didn't go in saying, well, whatever program you all have, that's what we going to do. No. Whatever the Lord gave me for that church, that's what I presented to that church. My first challenge in the first church I pastored was to lead the church to be a tithing church, because they had 4 group captains. Group captain 1, group captain number 2, $2 to the church, $1 for the cemetery, $2 for the pastor, That's the way they read it on Sunday morning. But when I went in, I said, no, can't operate the church with dues. The church is to be operated with tithes and offering. So I shared with the church, we got to do the tithes and offering. Where the chairman of deacon at that time, he stood up in the church meeting and said, you can't pay your way to heaven, It ain't church, it's not just about money. And so I let him talk, and I said, but first Sunday coming, we going to have tithe box. So after service, after the business meeting, I said to him, so brother, can I walk you home? He lived across from the church. So on our way over to his house, I said to him, brother, I don't ever want that to happen again. You can get up and fight against me, but I don't ever want you to stand up in the church and fight against the Bible, God's word, because tithe is in the book. And so he did. He said, well, okay, Pastor. And it was probably 2 or 3 years later, he and his wife became tithers. And that really blessed the church. So we were able to do things, because now you got more money coming in. But that was one of my biggest challenges, was to deal with the deacons in the church. Now my second church, Galilee, no problem there. When I went there, they had been trying to build a church, I think, for 20-some years. And when I got there, the church about falling, the old building, raining in it. And in the wintertime, I was sitting in the pulpit with an electric heater up there, and I think I kept the heater warmer than the heater kept me. Man, I like to froze, and oh, jeez, I like to froze. If it rained, people have to move over in the church, because it's leaking. And that first year, I celebrate my first year anniversary in a new church, from the ground up, new pews and everything in it. Celebrate my first year. But it was a struggle, because when I talked about building a church, most of the members was elder members on fixed incomes, and they was, one lady in there particular was just fighting building a church. But the Lord blessed. I had to move my trustees and appoint more trustees, because the one that I had, they were determined they wasn't going to sign at the bank, to get any money, because they was afraid of losing their property and one thing and another. But I shared with them. They were determined they just wasn't going to sign. But I got me some others, and like I said, we built a church, man, and I was there 4 years. And then the Lord moved me from there to Mount Elam in Rankin County.
What about some successes? What are some things that over the last 50 years of preaching that you would, preaching and ministry, that you would look at as, and see it as successful?
Successful, number one, I'm going to have to start with the souls that I know the Lord saved in the ministry, because I've just seen lives turned around. I'm talking about God just saved people. And I'm not talking about just church attenders, but I'm talking about committed to Christ, that I can look back at some of them now that's still living, man, committed their life to Christ. And that was my ultimate goal, was to make sure that people were saved. And then I wanted to see the house of God. I wanted to see it nice, because I believe the church ought to be the most beautiful place there is you can go to on Sunday morning, is the church. So we did the renovating, bought pews and everything for Lily Mae. That was the first church. And renovated, and then build the church in Rockport. And then when I got to Mount Elam, the Lord moved me to build a church there. So we built a new sanctuary there, build a gymnasium. we did so much at Mount Elam. Mount Elam was that church that had all of the potentials in her to do whatever the Lord will for them to do. And that's one of the reasons after being there 12 years, it was such a struggle for me to leave the church, because when the Lord said my mission had ended there, I was just looking at what he had did there in 12 years, and I didn't want to leave that church. Now, there were members who really just kind of changed and turned with me after that. But I had to do what the Lord said do, and then he moved me to the inner city to start a church, and this is Emmanuel. That's how Emmanuel came about. I'm sitting in my office at home, and the Lord gave me the name of the church, and I didn't have anything together, but when I told Mount Elam that the fourth Sunday in September of that year would be my last Sunday, but it was tough, I'm gonna tell you. And I really did. I talked with the Lord about it. Lord, you sent Abraham out. At least he had herdsmen, he had money. And here I go. I just bought a car. And I got 2 children in college. And it's going to be hard on me. But the Lord says to me, if you do what I'm telling you to do, I'll bless you, and it won't take 12 years. And when I left Mount Elam on Joanne Street now, we're in an old police department building, a small building, and I'm sitting in my little office, and I'm actually sitting there crying one Monday morning. I'm crying because the Lord moved me from this big, nice church. My study was just about as big as the church was over here. And now here I am, and look like I'm stuck, And the deacons from Mount Elam drove over to Applereach Shopping Center parking lot, sit over there, and they said they looked at me in their little building, and they laughed at me. Because for me to leave what was in Rankin County to come here, but the Lord said he needed a church. And I said, Lord, but all these churches in Jackson. The Lord spoke to me again and said, there are many buildings in Jackson, but I don't have but a few churches. And I want you to start a church. I want you to go after the very people that the church don't particularly want. And there were drug addicts, drug pushers, prostitutes, and pimps. Church don't really want a lot of folks like that. But those are the church we want, those are the people we want out of to get in church. So I started evangelistic team before we even had our first service in that building. I had evangelistic team. We were going through the community, witnessing and sharing with people. And that first Sunday in October, we took in 61 members. 61 members. So the new church is off and up and going. And they started me off with $50 less than I was making in the other church. So things didn't really change, but 6 months later, I was making $50 more than I was making at the other church. But it's been a struggle. But now when I look at Emmanuel from that little storefront, 18 months, then we bought the church on South Drive, started a daycare. The following year, we started a school, and the Lord has just really blessed. And then 7 years later, we had outgrown that building. And then the Lord moved us to this place. And I was driving through here one day during the week, and I saw the building. I had heard somebody, so they thought Woodville Heights was looking at maybe selling the building. And I did. I whipped in, secretary was in the church, I rang the doorbell, and she let me in. I said, listen, I heard you all maybe thinking about selling the church, and I'm looking to move. She took me in, showed me around. I said, yeah, this is what we really want. Sanctuary now is smaller here than it was on South Drive. But classroom space, we got so much classroom space. And I came in and sit with the board selling the church, and they said, we want $1,000,001 for it. And I went home and prayed about it, called another meeting with the brothers, and I said, listen, all we can do is 700,000. 700,000. He looked at me, he said, preacher. I said, listen, all we can do is 700,000. Well, another church offered to give them the 1,000,001. He said, but the pastor was so arrogant and they act like, and he said, after hearing your mission, this is what we want to do in this community. I told him I wanted to do a senior home, and we wanted to evangelize the community. So that's what we wanted to do. So after we talked about it, he said, we're going to let you have it for $700,000. And that was everything. All they wanted to move out of the sanctuary were the hymn books. And they left everything in the school and daycare, everything in the kitchen, left the tractor with the bush hog and the weed eating, the lawnmower. They left it all here for us. And left one of the deacons who really saw after maintenance, the building, left him with us for 6 months to make sure we knew everything with water and gas, electric, we knew where everything was. And that was really a blessing to us too, to help us out.
So, Pastor, a lot of men don't make it this long in ministry. A lot of them give up or burn out along the way. What has been the secret to your longevity in ministry?
My love for God. I love God. And again, I love the people of God. I had talked about retiring at 70, and here it is 5 years later, and I'm still going. The Lord won't let me do it. I wanted to retire. That was my personal feelings, but I had never gotten anything from the Lord that it's time for you to retire. That was me. I had set a goal. I said, Lord, if you bless the church for 25 years, then I want to retire and move on to doing, because my heart is in evangelism, stewardship, and counseling couples. Now that's my heart. I really like doing that. And that's what I really wanted to do, is to do a ministry in that area outside of the church. But a love for people. And now I'm real nervous about retiring, because it don't seem to be a lot of real commitment out of some of the guys now. They look at stuff on TV and they change churches and they change the name of churches because you can't function if you're a Baptist church. And I'm just really nervous about a lot of things now. I really am. And I don't want to wind up retiring in the church, go back. Just go back. I don't ever want that to happen to the church. And number one, I don't want to see the church get away from the Bible, because a lot of guys are not committed to that Bible. They got certain things they're going to talk about, but they're not going to deal with sin issues that we're having to deal with today. So most of our preachers now are not going to deal with homosexuality and abortions and premarital sex and adultery. Gambling and drinking. Most preachers don't deal with those things now. But if we're going to get people out of the world, we're going to have to deal with those sin issues. And they're not coming into the church, and we got the same problems in here. And it is because the church have taken their hands off of sharing the truth. We want the politician to talk about it. So even now, people want to elect a president who is against homosexual. Some group want a president who is for it. All of these issues are not for politicians. This is a spiritual matter. And we need to preach against it rather than the presidents talking about it. Listen, man, and I said to someone, when you go to talking about legislating morals, abortion, homosexuality, what you gonna do with adultery? It won't be long. Be putting people in jail for committing adultery. Those sins are for the church, for the pastor, preacher to deal with.
So you're celebrating 50 years.
50 years.
What is work? What work are you currently doing now? What's next for you and Emmanuel?
Well, other than, my main issue is souls. Katrina sparked something in Emmanuel. That's when we started doing disaster work, was with Katrina. We spent probably over $80,000 Katrina down, remodeling and doing work down there. And after that, looked like Emmanuel just took on a heart for disaster, So, we've been to South Carolina and all over Mississippi, to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We've been everywhere doing disaster work. My heart now is to really continue to bless Emmanuel to let's do work in communities where there's disaster. And you do know that Emmanuel built a house back from the ground up in Rolling Fork. We're getting ready now to put down the floors, to finish the floors, and we're coming out of there. We've given 13 cars to families up there. And now we're just looking for another area. And I'm really thinking, because I heard a lady talking in the news about Silver City. Everybody did. We did. We went to Rolling Fork. And now, once we finish this house in Rolling Fork, the Lord really moved on me already. Stop in Silver City. And let's see what we can do to get someone back in their homes in Silver City. My other goal is for these church members, that every member in this church will own their own home. So that's why we're working now. And I talked with Mr. David Blunt about the houses on Cooper Road. And he did give me an avenue to get to where we're going to try to get every abandoned house on Cooper Road looking good. Getting members into it. And when we get every member in a house, we're going to get someone else into those houses. Because we'll take better care of our communities if we are home owners. When you rent, you don't tend to care for the property. So we're trying to make sure everybody will own their own home.
Pastor, Romans 12, 1 and 2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is a reasonable service. Mm-hmm. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, mm-hmm. that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Mm-hmm. This is by far been the passage that you've quoted the most and modeled your life after. Mm-hmm. What is it about this particular passage that has impacted you so greatly?
Romans 12, 1 and 2 really did impact my life. Like you say, you'll hear me quoting that more than any other verse in the Bible. Because Paul is saying to us, brethren, I beseech you all, by the mercies of God, that you will present your bodies as a living sacrifice, alive, living, a sacrifice that we're willing to put ourselves on the altar before God, and we're going to refrain from anything in this world, and we're going to seek to live a good, godly, a good, holy life. Now, I know most folks in churches now, none of us can live holy. I do not believe that because of the life he blessed me to live personally, a holy life. And I believe that every person that's been born of God ought to seek to live a holy life. And you can't do that if you don't present your body to him. And you got to come out of the world. I think the other Sunday I talked about the world is not our friend. So the body of Christ has got to look different from the world. Now you go in churches and you don't know the world from the church because we look like the world. We dress like the world. We do things like the world, even in the church now. Because we're not going to get the world loving Jesus when we're living hypocritical lives. I am convinced of this, that the church have did more harm to people. Did you hear me? The church have did more harm to people than General Motors have. Because we live double standard lives. We in church on Sunday morning, raising our hands and shouting, and then Monday, you don't even know we've been to church. And that's even some preachers, and I'm not nervous to say that either. So I believe that. I beseech you, brethren, by the mercy of God, you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God. And this is just your reasonable service. Then he says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Once our minds are transformed, we don't have a problem living a holy life. But it's a mind thing. Amen. Got to get your mind off of this world. Paul talks to us in Colossians. He says, set your affection on things above and not on things of this earth. That's where our affection got to be. But the scripture is right. We got to do this. We got to do this. So I'm committed to it, man. Be ye holy, for I am holy. Without holiness, no man will even see God.
All right, Pastor, last question. You still full of life and energy, but when it's all said and done, what type of ministry legacy do you hope to leave behind?
Well, I said this to the sons of the house. When I am gone, I want to live on in the lives of others. That's one reason I am seeking to be a role model to young men. That when I am gone, a young man will take on some of these traits of mine. He gonna live, number one, a good godly life. And he gonna take care of his family. He gonna love his wife. He gonna love his children. And if he's a preacher pastor, he gonna put his family before the church. Because a man is not going to be able to take care of a church if he won't take care of his family. Now, I know the older preacher told us totally different, but I want to tell every young man, if you don't take care of your family, you are less than an infidel. So I believe a man ought to take care of his family. Now, I'm living, and I try to say that on Sunday mornings in this church, where men will catch a hold to this. Take care of your wife. Treat your wife like she's a queen, man, and she'll treat you like a king. But you got to take care of her. And if you're going to be the boss, it costs. That means you can't have a wife as a roommate. Like when you go into college, you pay the water bill, I pay the light. No. The man has got to absolutely take care of his family. Now, I know in this 21st century, so we can't make it without both of us working. Both of you can be at work, but the man ought to be the one that makes sure bills are paid, everything is taken care of in that house. I want to leave that in the hearts and minds of men and women. I want young men, after I am gone, to quote me like I'm always quoting the late Dr. Scott. Amen. Manuel Scott, Sr. I'm always quoting him because he had such an impact on my life. The late Reverend Willie Jenkins, Sr. had an impact on my life, man. And that's what I want to do. I want to leave that behind. It ain't got anything to do with no car, no house, money, not any of that, but my lifestyle. I want it to live on in the lives of others.